The time is just gone 8:29 a.m. as we continue with the broadcast right here on Salam Media on News and Views this morning. If you have just tuned in, we welcome you to the show. And it's time now to focus on budget speech 2024. Our Minister of Finance presented the budget yesterday, and we are taking reaction. And firstly, we're going across to be joined by a SAFTU spokesperson, the South African Federation of Trade Unions. We're talking with Trevor Shaku. Trevor, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Good morning and thanks for having us.
Yes, clearly we are in very, very tough economic climates at this point in time, both locally and globally as well. And all eyes were on the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana, and interesting to see what he had to say. Some are saying that it was a fair budget, it was a balanced budget against a tough economic climate, and also taking a look at this is going to be an election year as well. So he had to find some sort of balance. But just initially, your overall reaction before we get into certain specific issues on the budget and what the minister had to say.
So firstly, as SAFTU, we say that this was not the people's budget, especially because it is still continuing on the trajectory of fiscal consolidation. And for the viewers, fiscal consolidation simply means that government is trying to reduce its expenditure on public goods and services. That is in local government, in public service administration, in higher education, and state-owned enterprises. So we see the continued defunding of state-owned enterprises. We continue to see the real-time decline of allocations to public service institutions and departments. For instance, if you look at all of the departments, none of them, except I think for economic development, will receive below inflation increases averaged over the medium-term expenditure framework. So this is a concern for us because the reductions are going to lead to the government departments and institutions unable to meet their requirements in terms of building of infrastructure. And we know that across the public service and the public sector, especially in local government, there is still serious shortage, severe lack of infrastructure. There are infrastructure backlogs in schools, and despite that, we saw them actually reducing 257 million rands from the school infrastructure backlog grants. We also know that in our hospitals, we have infrastructure backlogs. And this is attested by the fact that we've seen pregnant women lying and sleeping on hospital corridors on the floor because midwifery wards were filled to capacity. And if they are reducing the infrastructure on various departments, this is just still going to give us problems. And they did not mention any building of new hospitals, despite the fact that the public service system in our country, the public healthcare system in our country is filled to capacity, and the resources are not able to meet the growing demand as a result of the population growth. So we lament and are disappointed in the fact that the National Treasury is continuing to defund the public services, and this is going to have dire impact, especially for the 80% of the population who depend on public services.
Yes, and also I think when one looks at the spiraling debt levels, where a large portion of the budget is actually going across in servicing debt, and a lot of the debt, and you spoke about the SOEs, and he even mentioned, they spent something like 500 billion in terms of bailouts to the state-owned enterprises, and we've got absolutely nothing to show. In fact, the situation is actually getting worse. And when you speak about some of the biggest challenges, we know ESCOM is a challenge, Transnet, logistics, another major challenge, because all of this is actually hampering growth. And this is the reason why we are seeing year after year, we're seeing this huge deficit. And as a result, we're borrowing more. And this is the reason why we're getting very, very close to that 80%, debt level in terms of servicing our debt.
Look, a few things for us, especially in relation to that, because this is where we differ with the National Treasury. The first one is that the state-owned enterprises, where a lot of money is being utilized wastefully, because corrupt syndicates are actually looting out of those particular enterprises that are owned by the state, including Transnet, including Eskom and others. We say that the people who ought to be blamed there is government itself, because the collapse of governance and corporate management of those enterprises is as a result of poor governance coming from government itself. The people appointed there are people from government. The people looting through tenderpreneurship in those state-owned enterprises are mostly members of the ruling party and their business syndicates. So this is the first thing we need to put forward. But the second thing is that if you have such particular syndicates, who ought to act against them? It is the same government that has got the power of law enforcement, because it is an executive government and therefore has control over all law enforcement agencies. The fact that they are not able to deal with all criminal syndicates who are looting out of state-owned enterprises, again, is their problem. Now, let me move to the question of that. Now, in relation to that, we differ with the minister, because they want to say that the debt spiraling is problematic, and of course it's problematic, but they are saying that because of that, they are not going to be able to spend, because a lot of what ought to be going to other areas of spending in the public service and the public sector is going towards debt servicing costs. But we are saying that it is them in the first place who actually voluntarily took up interest rates on government bonds to 11 and 10% and 12%. Now, no one forced them, because this is a policy matter. It's not a question of the whims of the market, because the argument that Treasury and various neoliberal economists put forward is that the government debt is growing as a result of interest rates on government bonds. That's true, but they seem to suggest that the interest rates are not a voluntary option on the part of National Treasury, but that it is market forces that determine that. And according to this particular idea, the government is forced by those competing for the fewer funds in the pond, because the idea is that there's one pond upon which both private sector and the public sector are fishing and lending that particular money. But what they are not telling the South African public is that government bonds and the interest on government bonds are a matter of government policy, and therefore National Treasury opts to do that. And this is to prove this is shown by the fact that actually through government bonds, government is not necessarily borrowing money. It is actually providing safe-free assets, risk-free assets to those people who hold money in public. And those people who hold money in public would be your corporations, your people who are coming from foreign and have assets in our country. When they make profits, they can, of course, repatriate such particular amounts in rand denominated. So they have to pack such particular rand denominated profits elsewhere. And government provides government bonds to ensure that there's a safe-free assets for these people, so that they can be able not only to pack their money, but pack it in some interest-bearing asset that will also see an increase in that instance. So there is no forces of the market of supply and demand that are forcing increase on interest rates that are levied on government debt. It is the option and it is the choice of the National Treasury to raise those particular interests. So they can come later and cry that the debt servicing costs have been ballooned. Who has led to that particular ballooning? It is them, because they are the ones who have got the power and the final say when it comes to the determination of interest rates on government bonds. So we do not buy their story in the first place. And we are also saying that beyond the debt servicing costs, what we see here is that the government debt has to be disaggregated into two: foreign denominated government debt and domestic denominated domestic debt. Domestic denominated debt is actually 85% of the debt, and we think that a currency issuer like the South African government will not fail to meet its spending obligations. In other words, it will not default on paying debt that is denominated in its own currency. So this hullabaloo around rising debt servicing costs, in our view, is actually without base, because at the end of the day, it is government that is allowing that is raising interest rates on government bonds, but also we think that it is not a problem because such particular debt that is foreign, that is domestically denominated, will not give us problems in terms of repayment.
Well, Trevor, thank you very much for that and for your input and your time with us this morning. We do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Trevor Shaku with us this morning with the South African Federation of Trade Unions. He is a spokesperson, and with that, we're going straight across to be joined by Goolam Ballim, economist. Goolam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Yes, wonderful you're able to join us. Just your overall reaction and assessment of what the Minister of Finance had to say yesterday.
So overall, I think we can give some level of cheer to the finance ministry. I think they did reasonably well in attempting to signal that public finances will continue to consolidate. Of course, what was very significant and helpful, quite simply, was the fact that they were able to harness 150 billion rand from the savings that the Reserve Bank has been able to harness from their foreign exchange management. So effectively, what everybody now knows is the GFACRA, Gold and Foreign Exchange Contingency Reserve Account. Suddenly, South Africans have been introduced to this concept. And quite simply, it provided 150 billion rand worth of healing balm to the overall budget.
Goolam, just, some obviously are questioning the 150 billion and tapping into foreign reserves. It's like selling the family jewels to pay off debt.
Mm-hmm. No, you're very correct in the sense that this is kind of exactly as you suggest. It's kind of leaning into your savings, and as a function of that, you may have brought your future spending into current expenditure. The benefit, though, is that there was a buildup of a surplus in the silverware. So the foreign exchange and contingency reserve account is like an insurance policy. You want to keep a certain level of savings in that insurance policy so as to provide a safety net for the sovereign, and particular the rand, in case the rand were to suffer severe depreciation. The contingency reserve account effectively provides it with a level of buffer. However, the buffer had grown very handsomely in recent years to 500 billion rand, largely because of rand depreciation against the dollar. In other words, this is dollar balances, and when the rand depreciates, just simply by virtue of FX translation, you get more rands for your dollars without necessarily doing much. And so at 500 billion rand, you could argue quite safely that is in excess of the shock absorber you need. And some of that excess was screamed, and in this case, 150 billion rand.
Yes, obviously, what has come clear is, bailouts. We've seen it over the years, and the minister also acknowledged that the 500 billion or odd that they spent on bailouts obviously has not yielded the results that the government would have wanted. And again, there is a lot of focus because the two biggest challenges, and he spoke about low growth, and obviously with the growth rate that we seeing, or the levels of the growth rate that we are witnessing and experiencing as a country, that needs to be up. But again, looking at some of the issues that are preventing growth, and two of the biggest elephants in the room will still remain Eskom and logistics, Transnet. Goolam?
No, so forgive me, there was a delay in the line. You're very correct, and I love the fact that you've come back to highlighting simply that growth is the ultimate tonic. So you are perfectly correct in suggesting that a lot of the interventions feel like band-aid solutions. A lot of the interventions don't address the core shortcomings of South Africa. And quite simply, until we get growth at an elevated level, we will not have a structural remedy to public finances, to socioeconomic woes, and so forth. So growth is the ultimate ambition, and it has been lacking for more than a decade, where growth has been roughly 0.5% on the annual average. So we will certainly look to the forthcoming years where there is an acceleration in growth that is forecast and anticipated. And if it comes to pass, then of course that will be a structural remedy. But for now, the jury's still out in terms of whether we will enjoy accelerating growth in the ensuing years.
How critical, Goolam, is, we know that the coffers obviously have run dry, and that is the reason why we've had to tap into reserves, but also taking a look at the public-private partnerships that the government is talking about. We know ESCOM, we know electricity generation is going to go that way as well, Transnet to a large extent, because like I mentioned, these are two areas, these are the most critical areas at this point in time that is preventing growth. And again, how serious is the government and also the private sector in terms of this partnership to grow the economy? I think we have lost Goolam Ballim there. We have lost Goolam. He said there was a bit of a delay. Possibly there could be signal issues. But what we will do is we're going to go for a quick break. We'll be back and we'll continue unpacking the budget speech of the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana.
Send food and send kindness to those who have lost their homes and have been plunged into poverty. For those who are a meal away from starvation, a food parcel means an entire family can eat this Ramadan. That's the power of food. Donate now to Islamic Relief.
Dad, these Frymax chips are so tasty. Wow, that really takes me back. My dad bought me a Frymax chips every day after school. They were my favorite when I was your age as well. Quality is at the very heart of what we do, and that's why we ensure that every Frymax packet is filled with the beautiful goodness and flavor-packed taste that you've come to expect from us since 1982. Frymax, from generation to generation.
Approximately 2/3 of the population of Yemen are in severe need of humanitarian aid. With Ashraful Aid, you can make a difference. For just 700 rands, you can provide a hamper to a family in need. Visit our website today at www.ashrafulaid.org.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists, with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities. Conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities, your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
Well, we continue with the broadcast this morning. We stay with Budget Speech 2024. We are taking reaction, and we're going across now to be joined by the Public Servants Association of South Africa, the PSA spokesperson, Claude Naiker. Claude, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Very good morning to you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, Claude, we have been taking a fair amount of reaction with regards to the minister's budget speech against the economic climate, both in this country and globally. We know a lot is happening right across the entire world that is impacting on local economies. Some are saying the minister hasn't gone far enough. Others are saying it's been quite a balanced budget. It's been a mixture of both economic and political, considering we are in an election year. And just your overall assessment in terms of what you've heard come from the minister.
Yeah, thank you. It is perhaps maybe one could call it a legacy budget, if you want to indicate it to that. I certainly would not agree with that. I haven't seen anything tangible that has come up from it that will sort of create a reaction that one would stand up and take notice of. However, there's a few aspects that were a little bit positive, especially from the union side. If you look at basically the money that has been allocated to the education and health sector and the police sector as far as salaries are concerned. You will remember in 2018, the government reneged on a 3-year agreement on the salary increases. So it's reassuring that money has been allocated as far as this aspect is concerned, so the government will remain with its commitment to offer the salary increase itself. So that is in effect a positive. The other issue is that there is no increase in the fuel levy. So I think that will impact greatly on transport, especially to those more vulnerable workers that have to utilize public transport in order to get to the work situation. So generally what happens is that an increase in the fuel levy, that's ultimately passed on to the consumer, who then have to bear the brunt. And obviously with the increase in transport costs, this has a severe impact on basic food items because those costs are also transferred over to the consumer. Then the other issue we had as a concern with the emerging implementation of the national health insurance, we felt the government would have done more as far as pumping money into that area, because I think that in order for the national health insurance to effectively take place, you need to ensure that the infrastructure is right, especially in our hospitals. We haven't filled vacancies in 2017 in the public sector. And in order for the NHI to effectively take place, what generally happens is that you need good service to our citizens. And one of the areas is the critical shortage of staff at our hospitals, at our clinics, at our primary health centers. NHI will simply not work if you do not have all this in place itself. Also, the infrastructure as far as the buildings are concerned, in a lot of health institutions, some of them have become dilapidated, some of them have become to a stage where one cannot even visit them itself. You have serious power outages in these facilities, therefore making it a situation where you actually can't deliver the basic services. The other critical area that was highlighted was the two-pot system, where government has been gloating to say that employees will now have access to the pension savings and stuff. One must really caution the whole idea of retirement funds, provident funds, and pension funds is to cater when you obviously retire. And the PSA has also cautioned its members that we should not withdraw recklessly from our pension savings, leaving us with a problem that when ones retire, that they have little in the savings and then having to rely on government relief as such. So in that aspect, we're a little bit cautious on that approach. It's a double-edged sword because the withdrawals from your pension savings is subjected to tax. So this obviously boosts the state coffers in terms of tax. But I think the bigger picture is that if we continue withdrawing from our pension savings, you have a critical sort of problem when one retires itself. I thought at the end of the day, the government wanted to ensure that we generate sort of a savings culture within our society so that people do not have to rely on government relief at the end of the day. So those are the three aspects that we touched on and we looked at that we indicated that was of concern to us. Also, there was an announcement that there'll be no bailouts to some of the SOEs. We felt that a lot of money has been wasted on SOEs, especially failing SOEs that haven't delivered to our society. I picked up on the last caller or the comment on Transnet. I think the serious concern needs to be addressed at Transnet. How it's going to be done as far as pumping money into this SOE, because if I look at transport, we look at the train services, which is a cheaper form, a cheaper mode of transport. A lot of people that can utilize. I think that will help the most vulnerable of our society if we provide a cheap and cost-effective and efficient transport service so that people can get to work in timely. If you look at the current situation as far as traffic is concerned in terms of load shedding, where robots are not functioning, people are getting to work late, people are having to stand on the roadside because cars get damaged because of the severe amount of time they spend in traffic. I think trains will ultimately solve the problem if we all have the real political will to try and sort out that as such.
Yes, Claude. In fact, Claude, you've mentioned so much, but just one issue I'd just like you to just touch on as well, and I need
Yes.
your thoughts. And I know you made a comment with regard to the pension funds, and in fact, people are actually encouraged to tap into their reserves, which is exactly what government is doing. This is what Treasury is doing, tapping into the reserves to deal with debt. And earlier on, I was talking to somebody, and the comment I had made, it's like basically selling off your family jewels to actually pay off your debt, which is essentially what the government is saying. And again, the same principle would apply when you are encouraging people to now dig into their pension fund, because what are they going to do? Are they going to pay off debt? Are they going to, just live with their pension on a day-to-day basis because they just don't have money for food or whatever else to put on the table?
I think absolutely. If you look at the intention or the supposedly intention of government as to where people could dip into the savings, the reason was during COVID, a lot of people lost their jobs. That was one of the key reasons, and they obviously had to have access to pensions. The other issue is that during COVID, when people were laid off, some of them basically had to resign in order to get immediate relief in terms of finances. So the intention was government to say, listen, why should people resign in order to access the pension savings? Let's sort of devise a system where people currently can actually dip into their savings in order to have some sort of urgent relief. And I think if you look at the system currently, there are a number of conditions. You can only access the maximum of 10% of your pension savings at any given time to a max of 30,000. Now, I think a lot of ordinary citizens were saying, but what can I do with 30,000? Because they were expecting a lot more that they could actually take up on the pension savings in order to pay off some of the bond, the car repayments and what have you, so that they could help them on a daily basis. I think that's what ordinary citizens are expecting. In addition to that, you can only withdraw on an annual basis. I think it's once a year, and whatever withdrawal it is, it's subject to tax. So I don't think that's going to necessarily help ordinary citizens because looking at the amount, looking at how much you're going to have in your savings. If you have a person in the low income bracket that is contributing to a pension fund, I don't think he will have much money in his savings. So at the end of the day, how much he's actually going to benefit from it remains to be seen, and I don't think it will actually help anybody. I think from the PSA side, we're encouraging people to think carefully, to act cautiously when they want to withdraw, especially those people that are nearing the retirement age. You don't want to end up with a situation where you have nothing left in your pension savings to actually cater for you in your retirement stage itself. It's a double-edged sword. At one stage, it's helpful to some people. On the other hand, if you do not exercise their choices correctly and cautiously, you're going to end up in trouble itself.
The solution obviously is we need to see this economy growing, and we know, and all the reasons that we have been speaking about have been hampering economic growth in the country, and as a result, we're not creating enough jobs as well. Now, the government,
Yes.
Claude, is the biggest employer, okay? And, especially from someone like yourself coming from the Public Servants Association of South Africa, I suppose, that is also uppermost in your mind in terms of this budget and how this budget will actually translate into the creation of jobs.
I think there's a bigger picture here, and I think we've always been indicating in all our media statements and articles that we put out. One of the biggest problems is that government has not put in enough measures, or have not done enough to actually root out corruption. And one of the biggest problems that we have in public sector, especially on the procurement side, is corruption. A lot of money has been wasted due to corruption. Had we curbed that issue, I think at the end of the day, we would have made some dent in the public sector to say, listen, yeah, here's some money that we have or we've recouped in order to, one, improve the infrastructure in the public sector, and secondly, most importantly, is to try and fill vacancies. You heard last week and the week before, government does not have money to employ doctors that have graduated. That's a typical example of why we're sitting with the problem. And I think the major problem is that there's no will to actually try and curb the corruption in the public sector as such. I think if we make a small dent or we do something to eradicate that, I think it will go a long way to try and help in the public sector. As far as funding and filling of vacancies and so forth itself. We have a very dedicated public service. We seem to paint maybe one department like Home Affairs where they constantly have problems in the entire public service itself. But if you look at a public servant that goes to work on a daily basis, look at the environment in which he or she works. And you will ask yourself, would you want to go and work on a daily basis in this environment? But you will remember during COVID, a lot of them put their life on the line just to help ordinary citizens. But nobody really gave credit to those public servants during that day. But they still, up till today, giving the best to all ordinary citizens, be it any department, whether it's the licensing bureau, the transport, whether it's community health, they do the best to try and help the ordinary citizens. But just to round up that, I think from our side, if we had to cut out or eradicate corruption and maladministration, I think we would be able to solve some of the problems in the public sector as far as funding is concerned.
Well, Claude, thank you very much for that and for your time with us this morning right here on Salam Media. We do appreciate you taking time out. We wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Public Servants Association of South Africa spokesperson Claude Naiker with us this morning, unpacking some of the issues with regards to the budget. We're heading for 9 a.m. We've got Zaid Jedward standing by with the news.
Rejuvenating Media